Okay, I got the go sign. It's an interesting paper, and let me first explain the facts that the authors want to explain. Then I'll go through the model. Then I'll ask some questions. And so the main facts that the authors want to explain is that some investors, particularly endowments, seem to earn high excess returns. The alphas are positive from investing in alternatives, and these returns seem different from those that smaller investors seem to return. And secondly, these funds limit their quantities. They could perhaps invest more. An alternative explanation that people say is there's price impact, but here they offer a different explanation. And the last part is, in the usual type of Berk and Green model in practice, in mutual funds, all the compensation is via AUM, a fraction. So it's AUM that moves around. But here, there's compensation both in AUM and in performance. Okay? So these are the facts they want to explain. Okay? And the key idea, and this is what was explained by Peter, is that there's an informed investor who somehow knows more about the prospects of the fund than the alternative fund manager themselves. And of course, if the informed investor knows more, you have to compensate them to reveal this information via quantities. So what happens is they reveal they make an investment decision, so some big endowment. That investment decision then tells the alternative fund manager what information is there that he should invest based on. And then he commits to a contract to some type of mechanism design and expose the alternative fund manager would like to raise more money from informed investors. Well, see, this model looks a little like Grossman-Stiglitz, but it has features that are also kind of mechanism designing. Okay, so I'm going to discuss the model, then I'll come back and ask some questions at the end. One point I want to make here is, in Berk and Green, which is the model they kind of allude to at the start, it's the manager who is completely scarce. Okay? Here, the informed investor is also scarce in some sense. Okay? So they don't quite tell us what the manager does to make the manager scarce, but the informed investor has to be compensated, and that's where these rents come. Okay? And the second comment I want to make is the contract, including the fees that are paid by the uninformed investors, have to depend on the quantity that the informed investor chooses. So it's like the informed investor picks a quantity, and then the whole contract then depends on that. Because what you're doing is you're charging the conditional gross return in this model. Okay? Okay, I'm going to spend most of the time in the linear model because that gives the cleanest intuition, and I'll make some comments at the end. We'll come back to this issue. So of course, like in Berk and Green, you have this declining investment opportunity, there's decreasing returns to scale, and if the manager were to do this with some information S, then you write this problem, it's quadratic, and the optimal solution is very clear, it's just this alpha S divided by 2b. Okay? And then the expected profits, which then have to cover this cost, are alpha S squared by 4b, which has to be bigger than delta. So that gives you this critical alpha, alpha m, which is 2 square root of b delta. Okay? So later on, when you get a manager to give you information, the manager is deciding when to acquire information or not. That threshold somehow has to match the same threshold. Okay? And they think a little, so if you think of this as an annuity, you can say there's some alpha m, that's what you get, as to kind of cover this information acquisition cost. You could also think of this, and they do this a little in the paper, that you're only doing this for t periods, and you're doing it every t periods acquiring information, in which case you'd get these annuities. Okay, so now we get the informed investor, and you're going to consider a specific type of contract. So you're implementing the first best by this contract. You give this informed investor a fee, there's a carry, and you commit to this function that my total investment will be Q as a function of QI. And so then what do you do? So specifically, Q of QI is this Q0 plus KQI, where K is bigger than 1. And the informed investor looks at this, and he says, well, what do I maximize? This is my return. I have to pay a fee, but the price impact or the decreasing returns to scale depends on the total quantity. So I have to take the quantity that the Q0, which is given, and then if I optimize this quadratic problem, I get this as alpha minus alpha I, where alpha I is BQ0 plus Fi. Okay? So that's the quantity he'll pick. And then if you think of this as a big cost C, and there's an annuity for T periods, you're going to find the cost per period, and then you're going to compare that to acquiring information versus not acquiring information. And you'll see again that you'll acquire information beyond some boundary alpha I. Okay? So now you want to match these two contracts so they get the same investment. So what do you need? Remember that the optimal quantity was alpha by 2 beta, so that's what you're given. But now that's equal to Q0 plus KQI of alpha. But QI of alpha is alpha minus alpha I by 2 beta K, so the K doesn't matter. Those things cancel, so you get that Q0 must be alpha I by 2 beta. You know alpha I is 2 times the square root of beta, so it gives you exactly what Q0 is. Okay? So that pins down Q0. And then these two cutoffs must be the same. The manager must decide when to acquire exactly the same cutoff. So if you know that alpha I is B plus Q0I, and you equate the two, you get the informed investor has got square root of beta delta. Okay? And the last step, of course, is the uninformed investor has to make 0 profits, conditional on the quantity choice of the informed investor. So if you write that down and you substitute it out, you find that the informed and uninformed investor gets alpha by 2, which is based on what it is. Okay, so why is it that the quantity has to be limited? When the manager makes his first best decision, he's not sharing the upside with anybody. He's getting all of it. Okay? However, when you have a contract, as long as S is not equal to 1, he's not getting all of the output, the informed investor is getting some part of the upside. Okay? But what that means is I don't feel the full effect of the decreasing returns to scale. I only feel some part of it. The informed investor is going to take some part of it. So I always want to go invest beyond the point where the informed investor does. You can show that these marginal things. Okay? So I have to kind of commit and say, look, I'm not going to raise more capital. Okay? So that's the first class implementation. Okay, so let me think some thoughts about this basic model. So first of all is, in Berk and Green, you simply price based on the AUM, okay? But here, everything is in some sense, the quantity you pick is conditional on what the informed agent does, okay? So it has this rational expectations aspect to it. You can't just fix the fee unconditionally ex ante. It's like you have to go to this endowment. The endowment has to make a commitment. You have to reveal to everybody what the commitment is. And based on that, you get this fee. Okay? And the other aspect of it, and this I think is important, is it's kind of related to this issue of delegation that Peter talked about a little at the end. In some sense, the informed investor he has got some monopoly. He's got this information. So in that sense, you would think he's scarce. But he's only compensated for the cost of acquiring information. And you kind of wonder, what kind of information? I was trying to think, what do the informed investors know that the alternative manager himself doesn't know? Okay? I mean, there's a distinction between validation. Validation would be, Peter knows how smart he is. And then I come and validate that somehow and say, hey, Peter is smart. okay? But here in this model, that's not exactly what's happening. It's Peter himself doesn't know how good the alternative fund is, and I come in and say, hey, Peter, you're really good, and I get a rent for that, okay? So I think the authors have to motivate better what type of information this is, okay? And the other aspect of it is, the authors use this evidence by Beganow and Sirivardhane, which says that, look, these returns to different investors are different. But there's some heterogeneity here, right? So if you go look at the paper, you see that the variation in returns between groups of investors is very low in venture funds. It's much higher in other funds like real estate. In this model, that can only come about by heterogeneity in information. That's the only aspect that moves. And it isn't clear to me, at least. I just looked at it. Why is there less information about VC funds? And why is there more information about real estate funds? Okay. The last thing I want to comment about is I think that it's important to think, I think what the authors have in mind is there are lots of these informed guys, and I pick one. It's somehow competitive in that aspect, okay? And I'm not completely sure that that's true, because there is only one given investor, then it looks like there's some bargaining aspects to it, and the authors do talk about it. And I think that has to be clarified, okay? Whether there's, in Grossman-Stiglitz, if you think, there's a continuum of informed investors, and therefore they don't earn any rent beyond their cost of acquiring information. But here, if there's only one person, it isn't quite clear to me whether you could escape with giving all the bargaining power to one. Okay? So what happened here? Okay. The one thing to think about is at higher costs of acquiring information, you actually get a negative carry, or K is less than 1. Okay? So then it raises the question, what's happening? You're transferring most of the surplus in some of these cases to the informed investor. So then the question is, what does it mean in these cases when the informed investor is getting such a big part of the surplus? And it's not clear to me in the data you see informed investors, you see such big heterogeneity in the data. Okay, so I think, I have a few minutes, but I'll conclude a little early. I think the authors present a model of where the manager has some alpha information, which is revealed, and the informed investor's quantity choice reveals the alpha to the manager and to everybody else. So two features stand out. One is different contracts for different investors and restrictions on overall investments. So that's consistent with the aspects of the data. And I've raised some questions on the mapping of the model to the data, and what kind of information the investors possess that the manager does not. At times, the authors seem to say this is a model of a startup alternative manager. There, the mapping seems very clear. But if you're thinking of alternative manager, which has been there for 30 years, it's not so clear what this information is, okay? But it is a positive model, and I think that's a good feature. There are lots of interesting things you can test, because now everything depends on the informed investor's share. So you should see when the informed investor's shares are higher, the fees of the uninformed investors are also higher. There's this correlation, so there are lots of things to be tested. That's it.